Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Courageous Conversation, practicing presence in neglected neighborhoods. And I just want to welcome you into this space. Thank you for joining in with us tonight. The reason we're here is for this. I mean, so often we get books recommended to us, and we never know the author's heart of why he wrote the book and what drove him to him or her to sit down and spend the time to put this text together, to share it out with the world. And so tonight we wanted to introduce you to the author of the book, Church Forsaken, Practicing Presence in Neglected Neighborhoods. And it's so important because right now, in our world and in our time, there's so many that are wondering how they can make a difference, how to change the narratives in the place where they dwell, where they exist, that they call home, their home communities and neighborhoods. And so we want to roll this out. We have an online book discussion group that you can join. The links to that are going to be in the chat tonight. And also, just the best way to take in media, to take in scripture, to take in the things, our news stories, is in community. So if you desire to be in a community group, we have a way for you to sign up to be able to jump into a community group and be a part of that. So once again, my name is Johnathan Sublet, and I'm the lead pastor for the Hi-Crest campus of Fellowship Bible Church. And tonight on this call with me is my buddy, Johnathan Brooks, the pastor of Church Forsaken. Everybody welcome Johnathan.
Hey, what's going on? What's going on?
Yeah, man. Thank you for joining us tonight from the Windy City. Chi-Town, man, and I tell you what, every time I've been, I've enjoyed myself. And so I was able to come visit your community, come visit your church. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, and then we'll get it rolling tonight?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, let me just say, Johnathan, and to the whole Fellowship Bible family, thank you for having me. Thank you for engaging with the text of Church Forsaken, hearing all the great stories about Inglewood and the South Side of Chicago, so that we can make sure that the narrative that you hear about the place that I love is complete and not incomplete. So yeah, just a little bit about myself. Johnathan Brooks, born and raised on the South Side of Chicago. Love this city with all my heart. This is where God has put me. And for that reason, I feel like this is where I'm supposed to use the gifts that God has given me right here in the city that God placed me. I am the pastor of Canaan Community Church, which is here in the Inglewood neighborhood. Been the pastor there going on 15 years next year. And here married to my beautiful wife, Michelle Brooks, with two beautiful daughters. And just raised my family here. Even though growing up, I had equated success with getting as far away from this area of the city as possible, and moving on up, and upward mobility became, for lack of better terms, became an idol and a false god for me, right? Like comfort and I think just ease became what I thought was a marker of God's blessing. So, but this is where I am now. I am so thankful that God brought me back, because what it's done is completely changed the way not only I see my neighborhood, but the way I understand what it means to be a representative of God in the world and what God is doing in the world, despite what we might see every day. So I'll get some more into that. But Inglewood is a beautiful neighborhood on the south side of Chicago that's often narrated by its brokenness, and people ignore its beauty. And one of the main jobs that I'm trying to do is elevate the beauty so that the narrative of brokenness is balanced out.
Yeah, man. When I was young in ministry, one of the guys that was older than me, one of my big brothers in the ministry, used to say, "Hey, if you want to know if a pastor, what he's preaching, he really lives, look at his wife when he's preaching and look at her face. Her face will tell you that if he's telling the truth or not, right?" And when I came to visit Canaan and tour Inglewood with you, man, I looked at the faces of people who were not attached to Canaan.
Yeah.
As you spoke, and I saw that look of somebody who was in love, man, like somebody who loved their peeps for real. And so when I heard you speak about how much you love, I love to hear people speak about how much they love their families and how much they love their communities. And so, what is it about Inglewood that makes you ride so hard for Inglewood, man?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Like the number one thing I'll say is because this is the place where God put me, and I make sure I say that because I believe every place, every person, every place displays the glory of God and the brokenness of humanity. So I don't think that Inglewood is like head and shoulders better than any other place. I just believe that I love it because this is where God put me. And if God put me somewhere else, I would fall in love with that place the way God wants me to too. But Inglewood is home now. And as long as it's home, it's going to be the place that I invest in, the place where I try to be the tangible presence of God in. And I think what makes me fall in love with it also is the fact that there's so many stories and false dichotomies about the place without people ever experiencing it. Like they get all the information from the news, they get all the information from media, and never step foot in the neighborhood and already think they know everything about it. And so I think that's what makes me ride so hard. It's like, man, no. If you just knew the people, if you just walked the streets, if you just picked an apple off of our tree, if you just got some tomatoes out of our garden, if you just experienced walking through Inglewood, you would know that God is here. And it makes me go every morning, wake up to go, how can I be a better megaphone for what God is doing here every day? So I think that's really what motivates me, man.
Yeah, that's a challenge, man. How can I be a bigger megaphone for what God is doing wherever He's placed me at? That's a good one, man, to write down and keep. So what motivated you to write this book? It's not like you have a shortage of stuff on your plate. And so what motivated you to spend the time that you could have been pouring into the myriad of things that you were involved in, both locally where you're at and nationally, to write this book?
Yeah. So I'll say there's a couple of things that got me to the point. First of all, I in no way consider myself an author or a writer, right? Like if you talk to, 26-year-old Johnathan when he started pastoring Canaan, and I'm 40 now, I would have never said I would have wrote a book, right? Like that was so far off the beaten path for anything that I thought I would be doing in my life. But I'll tell you, the first reason why I wrote it is it was for my neighborhood, right? Like if nobody else in the world ever read it, if I could just get it in the hands of all 30,000+ residents of Inglewood, that would have been enough for me, because then it would have been an opportunity for us to see who we really are, right? The amazing resiliency that we've had when we're really a neighborhood that the city has left for dead, right? Like figure it out on your own, figure it out without resources, figure it out with poor schools, figure it out with over-policing happening in your neighborhood, figure it out. Good luck to y'all. And then the narrative we'll give the rest of the city is that's a place to drive through, but never to.
Man.
But I wanted my neighborhood to see, no, there's millions of things that we do every day. There's good people living in our communities, doing the work, taking care of their children, making things happen. Their community organizations are causing true change to happen in our community. And I wanted to elevate that story. So first of all, it was for the resident. It was for my daughters, my wife. When we read this and somebody says something negative about your neighborhood, you can go, I have an artifact that will show you that you only know a part of my story.
Yeah.
I think secondly, the reason I wrote it was for the church. Because I wanted the church to recognize that we are God's chosen change agent for the world, right? God, there is nowhere else, no other entity thrown out in Scripture as that the gates of hell won't prevail against. He only says that about on this rock will I build my church. Right?
Yeah.
Not my parachurch, not my not-for-profit. I love not-for-profits. I love parachurches. We need y'all. But it is the church that Jesus has ordained to be change agents. And when I drove around my neighborhood that had 300+ churches in it, and yet had one of the highest crime indexes and poverty numbers and unjust laws on the book, all this, it was like, how is the church so present and yet the brokenness so elevated? And I just really wanted to call the church out and say, y'all, we got to start being fortresses that are in our neighborhoods trying to keep the bad out and hide in our bubbles inside. No, we got to become intricately woven into our neighborhoods. And that's what the whole phrase of, there are no God-forsaken places, just church-forsaken. As I started saying that to churches, it started to click to them. Like, oh, we've been acting as if God isn't in Inglewood, or God isn't in Hi-Crest, or God isn't in wherever you are. But the truth is, God's always been there. What's the problem? Why are certain places more forsaken? Why are certain places more neglected? Because the people of God are doing the neglecting. And so I really wanted the church to hear that message. I wanted them to see what the rest of society sees when they see the church. That's where the book cover came, with the bars and gates on front of the doors. Like, all week long, our churches are closed up and covered and barred up. And then we come on Sunday talking about the doors of the church are open. Don't nobody want to walk in your doors when you've been closed all week long?
Come on.
Yeah. That was the main one, right? Like, first of all, for my neighborhood, secondly, for the church. And then I think the byproduct has been the way it has impacted the world. I would have never guessed, like, that pastor groups in Indonesia and South Africa and all over the world would be, like, studying the book, because there is so much overlap when you talk about neglected places, right? Mm-hmm. I might name Inglewood, but there are neglected neighborhoods and places all over the world. And everybody's able to understand this message. And so it's a wake-up call that no place is neglected by God. What are the people of God going to do? So that's my main motivation. I'll tell you, man, like, people ask me how long it took me to write it. I tell them it took me 4 years, 3 years to believe I could write it and a year to write it. So, for all aspiring writers out there, just know that it's possible if you got something to say.
Yeah, man, that's good stuff. Where you speaking, I know you love hip hop like I do, and so I was hearing the Ghetto Boys saying the world is a ghetto, or that old DJ Quick song, just like Compton. And so it's like it bleeds out wherever you're at. You can make an impact wherever you at, and so I just love that. But in the book, you spoke about growing up in Inglewood, and you talked about this earlier tonight about. But you thought, just like me, man, that our way forward is out. What, as much as you love Inglewood now, when you look back, what sold you on the story that in order to go up, you had to go out?
I would say, man, like, I have spent so much time trying to identify where that story came from, right? Mm-hmm. I don't feel like it was ever explicitly told to me that if you're going to be successful, it means getting out.
Yeah.
But every single, like, person that I had ever seen that was successful, or every story that I kind of had around success, was one of moving up and out. Right?
Yeah.
Whatever you named as your heroes, your athletes. For me, it was, I was a hip hop dude, so rappers big time. And they was always, as soon as you got some money, first thing you did was lead a hood, right? Athletes, even educated folks, like, they went away to college and they didn't come back, right? Like, they went away and that was it.
Yeah.
And so I don't feel like my mom never said, I expect you to move away. But my mindset was, I'm going to get a big old house and move my mama out the hood, right? Like, that was my attitude. So I think what I've settled on is just that the narrative is pervasive in our society. Whew. It's pervasive in our society, and it's hidden. It doesn't even have to be said explicitly. It's implicit that if the place that you live in is only narrated as a place to survive, right? Yeah. It's never a place to thrive. Then your mindset is, I'm just supposed to survive this place until I can get to a place where I can thrive. Nobody has to say that. All you got to do is show me images of my neighborhood always on the evening news with somebody dying. All you got to do is show me images of my community with just trash on the ground and overgrown weeds. All you got to do is show me images of my community with dilapidated schools and broken down parks. And I go, I got to get out of here if I'm going to be successful. You don't have to ever tell me that, right? This is why I said we have to change what people see. We have to change the imagery and the narrative that people have. It's not that there's not issues, but what about the other side of that story that makes me go, oh, well, there are people thriving here too. Yeah. So that's when it like I got sold on it. It was like, oh, no one told me I had to leave. It was just pervasive in culture based on how my place was narrated. And it made me realize that story, narrative, was the most powerful tool we have in whether or not people actually understand what success is and what faithfulness to the kingdom of God actually is. It's really not about how much we know, how much money we have, how much education. It's really about what we believe about people and places.
Come on, man. I one of the flyest things, man, I've seen is when I came and I learned about the images and how the neighborhood got on board with, we're going to change how people see us. So y'all started raising money to buy all the billboards in the neighborhood and on the highway when people buy. So they see these big, and you say, we're not going to trust somebody else to take the pictures. We're going to take the pictures. We're going to make the billboards. And so when you drive through our neighborhoods, it won't be what images you put there. It's going to be what images we put there. Man, what? Come on, man.
Yes. And the Inglewood Rising campaign was clutch. And I don't take credit for being a brainchild or nothing. I'm just a part of a resident association that had a great idea. And what we did was we took pictures, young photographer in our neighborhood named Tanika Lewis Johnson. Look her up on Facebook or any social media. She's a beast. Pictures. Tanika, Tonika, Lewis Johnson. But she took all these pictures and she was taking them for her own kind of artist gallery that she was doing on Inglewood to change the narrative. Well, we said those are the kind of pictures we want in our neighborhood. And to be honest, the billboards weren't for people driving past. It was for people who live in the neighborhood. Yeah. We want you to see your neighbors up on there with phrases like, there is love in Inglewood, I am Inglewood, there is hope in Inglewood, so that everything that you see about your neighborhood isn't about violence, poverty, and degradation, right? But then it's like, what's the byproduct of that? The byproduct is that when other people drive past who don't live in the neighborhood, they too get a chance to see those images. So yeah, we put them on the expressway. We wanted to make sure if you were on them people who only drive through, that you recognize what you're missing when you don't come and stop. So yeah, it was huge, man. And I lucked up, man. They put me on one, right? They put me on one with a little phrase, I am Inglewood. Crazy. And it happened on my birthday in 2017, right? So I'm thinking like, I left for college in 1997. 20 years later, from the neighborhood I was trying to hightail it out, my neighborhood has blessed me by putting my face on a billboard with the words, I am Inglewood on top. And I tell you, boy, Jeremiah 29 jumped off the page for me then. It jumped off the page. It was like, seek the peace and welfare of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord on this behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare.
Yeah.
Man, you couldn't tell me nothing no more, Jonathan.
Come on, man. Tell the truth. When you first saw your face up, did you bump Juicy a little bit? Did you put the biggie on and bump Juicy just a little bit?
You know it, man. You know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They play me close like butter plate toast. You know what I'm saying?
Come on, man. Come on. No, come on. Man, that takes, when you mentioned Jeremiah 29.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you just brought that up in the way you did, in the context that you did, because you talked about how you wrote this book primarily for your neighborhood because they have only seen part of their stories get told. And you wanted to remind them of the fuller story of what's in the Inglewood neighborhood. And I feel like the same thing happens with Jeremiah 29. So most of the time you hear people quote verse 11. But here's the deal. You rarely see people talk about Jeremiah 29 in context. And here's the deal. Scripture is kind of like statistics. What they say, if you can make statistics say anything, right?
That's right.
And so I've never seen anyone contextualize Jeremiah 29 the way I read about in your book. And I'm telling you, chapter 7 was one of those chapters where I just threw the book across the room. Right? That's just one of those ones where I threw the book across the room. So why Jeremiah 29? Why Jeremiah 29?
Yeah. So I wish I had some deep theological answer for that. But Jeremiah 29, I had heard it a million times, right? But I'd always heard it mostly focusing on verse 11. Getting to, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you and to give you a future with a hope. So it was also always about like God having plans for you. But one time, I don't even remember who it was, but I heard somebody preach on it, and the focus was actually on verse 7, and they started talking about it from the context of Israel actually being in exile, right? Like this was not a happy time for Israel. And they spent most of their time only on verse 4 and then jumped to 7. But verse 4 was all about to the exiles whom I have sent into exile, right? Like God is like writing this letter through Jeremiah saying, I put y'all in exile. This is like, you didn't get to choose it. This is where I placed you, right? And I was like sitting there thinking, I'm like, man, that's how I feel about the crib, right? Like, yeah, that's how I feel about being back in Inglewood. Like I wasn't like, jumping and super happy to be back home. Like God got me back home, sneakily. My mom got sick when I was in college, and I came back home and take care of her. Sneakily. And then, I ended up getting married, and like I'm like, oh, now I'm back in the neighborhood, and but I had big plans still. So I'm listening to him talk about how this is not like what Israel dreamed up for themselves. If it was them, they'd be back in Jerusalem with the covenant of God and da-da-da. And I'm like, oh, that's how I feel. Like I'd be in the suburbs in a big crib with a white picket fence and 2-car garage and like, you know what I'm saying? It'd be quiet and perfect and everything. Like that's what I was dreaming, how I get back while I'm hearing sirens and all like, And I was like, man, I got to read the rest of this passage because this dude talking to me. Yeah. And so I went home after that, and I just really dug into chapter 29. I wanted to know, how did they end up in exile? Like, what did they do to make God mad that God kicked them out? And the more I read it, the more I was like, yo, this is just like my life. It's like making decisions to the opposite of God, putting, like, really what happened with Israel was they were serving false gods, worshiping idols. And so God got so mad, he sent them to Babylon, the land of idols. You can have an idol palooza, as many idols as you want, since you like idol worship so much. Oh, man. You with idols everywhere, And I'm thinking our own society, I'm like, bro, we done set everything up. Come on. As an idol. Come on. And so I'm like, that's exactly what happened. And then God does something crazy. He sends them to the last place on earth they would want to be, the place they're trying to get away from, wouldn't want to be there, and says, build houses and live in them. And by the time I was reading this, my family had just moved into a house. I was just becoming pastor of Canaan. I didn't know what was going on in my life. How did I end up here? We got a house in the neighborhood. I'm like, God, what are you doing? And he's like, build a house and live in them. I'm like, this is crazy. In my mind, build a house and live in it means build a fortress, like protect your family from the hood, And what happened was, like, it was the exact opposite. I tell a story in the book of how God completely smashed that and completely, like, changed the whole paradigm about that. And it wasn't nowhere near about, like, oh, Johnathan, I want you to come save this neighborhood. No, it was like, Johnathan, this neighborhood is already a great place, and it's going to save you. Yeah. Yeah. And so I started to understand what building a house and living in it actually meant from my own life, right? And so I'm not going to give it away in case you ain't read the book. This is one of the best stories in the book, so you got to read it on your own. But from this story of my first house, I learned right away that when God said live in it, he really meant, like, be present, like be more engaged and involved in your community, not set yourself up as a fortress in your neighborhood. And so as I started to realize, like, this Jeremiah 29 passage was actually interweaving with my life, I started reading books. Like, I'll tell you a book that really influenced me was Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. Because Just Mercy did an excellent job of interweaving the stories of those who were dealing with incarceration issues with Brian's story, right, of how he got connected into this. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to use Israel's story, the way he used the stories of those who were dealing with incarceration issues, to show how it impacted my life. All right? And so I was going back and forth through Israel's story and my story, and the more I did it, the more it overlapped. The more I realized God did this intentionally. plant gardens and eat what they produce. And I started thinking about the ways that we were planting gardens in our community, right? Actual, tangible, real gardens that were like soil and seeds. And then stuff like the Kusanya Cafe, the Whole Foods, the Food Co-op. Like these were all gardens that I didn't even recognize had been a command from God to plant. So I was living my life and I was watching how God was showing me that Jeremiah 29 was the roadmap of how to do that. And it's only gotten deeper.
Yeah.
So Jeremiah 29 because God intentionally interwove my life into that passage and helped me to realize that really what God was saying was I told Israel to be present in a place they wanted to escape.
Yeah. But it was the place they always asked for, right? I mean, it was like Brewster's Millions. I don't know if you remember that. It was like Brewster's Millions, man. It was like, oh, he wanted money. And it was like, okay, I'm going to show you how much you really don't know what you're asking for, man. And that's the story of our lives, right? We ask God, we ask God for a lot of stuff, not knowing what we're really asking for. And then when he gives it to us, we're like, why, God? Why are you doing this to us? And set us up, man. So that, I mean, that's so good. And then just the weaving of the stories, I love that, of how they tied to it.
Jonathan, like, just one thing, like, I think that if we did more contextualizing of scripture that way, right? And I'm not saying like eisegeting, like taking our present day stuff and putting it in the Bible. Yeah. That's not what I'm talking about. No. I'm saying if we actually look at the context of which a lot of this stuff is being written, Old Testament and New Testament, the context of that day, it mirrors our context of today a lot of times. And we can understand that a lot of what the prophets and what the disciples were writing, especially Paul's letters, right? Like if we stop trying to smear Paul's letters like mayonnaise over the whole church and realize he was contextually writing to churches in specific contexts, right? He wrote to Ephesus, and therefore he didn't say, if you don't like what I'm saying to you in Ephesus, commute over to Corinth and go to church over there because, they got it going on. No. He said, figure out the own contextual issues of Ephesus, right? And so he starts talking about women in ministry and women and all these other things in Ephesians, but you understand the context of Artemis worship and all the things that were going on at that time in the society. You understand why Paul says what he says about women stepping back in church, right? Like there's so many things that mess us up if we actually look at the context of what's being written. And so I don't want to get too philosophical, but that's just a huge miss on the church.
Bro,
like we gotta work.
Yeah, I was at an event today, and man, sadly, it's what you brought up, man, and this is a whole nother issue about this what Paul writes there, and people take it out of context and smear it. And it grieved one. I never knew that the YWCA sponsored the March on Washington.
Yeah.
Man, women, when you go back to the tomb, to Jesus at the tomb, women have always been down.
Yes.
On the squad, right? I just always.
Yes.
And then I learned, man, that my state was like number 42 in female empowerment and equity. Man, that grieved my heart, man. And we use scripture sometimes to justify how we treat women in bad ways. And I that grieves my heart because we, I feel like is some intellectual laziness in some ways.
Absolutely.
And so that grieves my heart. But man, what are some, it's one of the things we learn a lot from the successes. And I'm going to give you a chance here to share some of the stuff going on, like with your wife and some of the stuff y'all did with the buyback program in the city. But man, I've learned a lot more when people share their mistakes along the way. You move back in, I mean, you've had this tremendous impact. But what are some mistakes that you've made along the way that you look back now and be like, man, I've learned, that was so important for me to learn because this happened?
Yeah. Man, I got so many. So many mistakes. And I try to be honest about that in my book. Like, that was one of my main things was to say, like, I really tell on myself, like in this book, about how many times I thought I knew better than God, And I was telling God, this is the way we should go. You should sign my contract, God. But some of the main ones I'll say, first off is, and I think many of us fall prey to this, and that's the attitude in which we actually do the work from. You know, I remember one of my first encounters being back in the neighborhood was of me trying to tell somebody how grateful they should be that people want to come back here, right? Like, almost evangelizing that point. They're like, I moved my family back here because because God got something for you. God sent me here for you. You know, that type of language, right?
Yeah.
And when I think about how damaging that narrative is, like how damaging that language is, that God needed me to come and save them. When in reality, it was the exact opposite. God saved me from my erroneous, bougie, really, to be honest with you, one where I thought I was God and God was on the side of the throne. He saved me from that through my neighbors in the neighborhood who helped me realize that they were leaders long before I ever moved my family here. That God was already working through them in the way that they were discipling people in everyday life without a whole discipleship system in the church. But just raising kids to love one another, to look out for each other, to be resilient in the world, to not hate people who were definitely hating them by the way that they had neglected and stripped all the resources from them, right?
Yeah.
So the first mistake I say was the posture. And it took another event. You know, I talk about this event too, an event that changed my posture when folks came into church and helped me realize that we wasn't doing nothing special because we was having a little church service on Mother's Day morning. And so I think it is important for us to recognize, even if we're doing good work, you can do good work in the wrong way and destroy it all.
Come on.
Your posture and your attitude can be more damaging than the work you're doing.
Yeah.
There are certain people in my neighborhood who I know that they still have a very savior mentality. They don't have a very good outlook on who the neighborhood is, but their heart is genuine. Like, they love people. They just got to work on the narratives they carry. I'd rather have somebody like that working with me than somebody who understands in the cerebral that, oh, we should love our neighbor, we should be humble, but they really not. They're doing it for their own self-glorification. Because your posture is more damaging than anything you can do. I'll say another one that was really, really bad was when I finally got the idea of living in a neighborhood and how important it was, that I became legalistic about it. And I literally stopped fellowshipping with pastors who didn't live in the neighborhood. Like I had my nose up at somebody who lived in the suburbs and their church was in the neighborhood. Like, oh, you just don't get it. You're too bougie to live in your own community where you worship, you know, all that. Like, to the point where God had to smack me like, dude, you didn't want to live there. Like, I forced you to do it.
Yeah.
And you grew into that. And that doesn't mean that people don't love the community just because they don't live there. You don't know what their story is. You don't know how that happened or what the traumas they've experienced. I learned that some other pastors were like, were veterans who had some severe trauma around gun violence and all these other things. They just couldn't do it, but they love the neighborhood, right? So I've learned I learned in a very harsh way that you can't be legalistic about anything. God deals with people on an individual basis. God dealt with me in my way. I share what I believe has worked for me, and then I walk alongside people as they figure out what works for them. So don't let legalism ever become like, as somebody who practices CCDA principles, don't ever let those 8 key components become the Bible and legalism. Like, have grace on people as they practice things the best way they can with the circumstances they have, and know that people are trying their best to love God and love people the best way they know how. So that was another big mistake. And I'll give you one more. My last one was expecting my congregation to just jump on board because I was all in. Please hear me when I say, it don't matter how many sermon series you preach on loving your neighborhood. It don't matter how many books you bring for people to read. It don't matter how many small groups and all that, until the Spirit of the living God
Come on.
convicts someone's heart
Yeah.
to say that that is the way they are supposed to live in this world, they are not going to change. And so your job is to walk alongside people as the Spirit works on their heart. The best thing you can do is continue to be an example in front of them. So revolutions do not start in the pulpit.
Come on.
They start in your house with
Man.
the decisions you make.
Yes.
The way you love your children, the way you love your spouse, the way you interact with the community, the way you are in the neighborhood. I was going to every community meeting, every resident association meeting, being a part of everything years before my church ever got on board. They thought I was crazy. 10, 15 years down the road now, Canaan Missionary Baptist Church is Canaan Community Church, right?
Yeah.
A church that was basically just a typical African-American Black Baptist church is now a cornerstone in the Inglewood neighborhood. But you know what? That was a long journey of people having their own spiritual awakenings and their own moments. I preached it. We read books, but I didn't do that expecting, okay, now we read the book. You read Church Forsaken, now we ready.
No.
That's not the
No.
So that was the biggest mistake, because I actually got very angry when people didn't, like, wait a minute, I just preached on it. And I learned very quickly that it's the Spirit of God that makes people move, not me. My job is to love.
Yeah. Man, I think that's so valuable, man. There's several things you said in there that's just good stuff to remember, man. You know, it's one of those deals where Moses, for 40 years in Pharaoh's house, he learned governance of large group of people and military rule. But that wasn't enough to move people, and so he tried to bring about change his own way, and it got him on the other side of the mountain for 40 years. And on the other side of the mountain with sheep is where he learned how to pastor. And it took him 40 more years of learning how to care for people before he was ready to go spend 40 years in ministry. So it was 80 years of prep for 40 years of ministry. And I feel like, man, it's so easy to do this work with the attitudes that you talk about. Like, I've had to be careful. Like, we talk about relocation all the time, but I've had to tell people, practicing presence is not just moving into the neighborhood. You can practice presence without living here. It just has to be something you commit. And then, it's the value of having people at your house, the value of having people in your living room, around your dinner table. I can tell you, there's one story, man. When people roll into our neighborhood, their first time in, I hear a lot of people complain about certain residents that leave their trash cans at the curb. And that's all they really know, these residents. But man, they don't see what I get to see out of the window of my office, where these residents cut each other's yards, where they take care of each other's kids, where they know more about community than most of the churches I've been a part of. But the only part of the story that we like to tell a lot of times is, man, I wish they would pull their trash cans in from the curb. And I feel like we miss out, man, because here's the deal. It was one resident who, their house is one of those houses, and I just love watching them interact. But when we got ready to do this, like, meet the teacher thing at the school, and me and my wife had no clue. And I thought the lady didn't like me. I'm seriously, because I would always talk or wave, and she would kind of like just. But her kid ended up being we was at the front door of the school. We had no clue where to go. It was people everywhere. This is our first time going to anything like this. And she said, "Pastor, follow me. I'll take you where you need to go." And man, it humbled me so much. I was like, man, I've been trying to figure out ways that I could break the ice. Maybe if we provide this will break the ice. Then she'll warm up to me. And I'm like, she had a care and a recognition of who I was this whole time. And when I was humble enough to say, I don't know what I'm doing, can you help me? When I allowed her to help me, that was the change in our relationship.
Affirm the dignity of everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody. That's what Jeremiah 29:7 is talking about. It's in the welfare of others that you find your own welfare. It's the welfare of the place that you find your welfare. So a lot of times Christians are here out trying to outserve one another rather than just being present, right? Like I tell people, it's not focused on service. It's a focus on presence. The more you're present in a place and with a person, the more there's a reciprocal relationship that is formed. And that reciprocal relationship is what actually leads to real service and love for one another. Because now I'm not serving you because I'm looking down on you as though I'm here to help. I'm serving you because you're my friend and we need one another, right? You serve me, I serve you. Yeah. But the church is so far from that because all we want to do is help people, pat ourselves on the back, and then go and be selfish after that.
Yeah, I was introduced here recently to some concepts, man, that I never thought of until recently when I read this book. It's a book called With by Scott Gittani. He's one of the co-hosts of the Holy Post podcast, yep. and he has this book where he talks about a lot of times there's a doing life above God, where you don't really feel like you need God in the church to try to get you to do life under God, and where you see God as this cosmic sheriff and you try to keep him happy by getting everybody to follow the rules. And he said that's why a lot of us so mean. Or then there's a doing life from God, where you're doing stuff to try to manipulate God to give you certain deals. And then the church tries to, like, preach sermons, tries to start the revolution from the pulpit to get you to do life for God. And then that leaves you wanting, right? Because you're trying to go to all the community meetings and your family's falling apart. You're trying to go, your kids feel like you're always absent. And he said the goal is to do life with God. And that's that presence, man. Like we're so busy trying to convert folks that we forget to be with folks.
Yes.
And so, man, I just thank you for that. What are some, we've talked about the mistakes, man. Share some of the exciting stuff, like the city actually hired your wife. So let me tell you something. Y'all over here pulling boss moves. First of all, you got Whole Foods to come into your neighborhood and build a store and let residents sell their products in the store. And jam hip hop in the store in Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And do give you a barbecue to let them open the store.
Yeah.
And then you got the city to hire your wife. Come on, man. Just share some of this stuff that's going on, man.
Yeah, no, like you make it sound so much easier than it seems. And it's definitely been over quite a few years. But I mean, it started with one of those small resident meetings where we're just saying, like, what are the things that we would want to see in our community? And a lot of it started from stuff like the Inglewood Rising campaign, where people just got excited because they saw momentum of community-led initiatives happening.
Yeah.
And, the precursor to the Whole Foods comment was our church started a food cooperative that just came out of a community meeting where we were literally taking donations from Trader Joe's and then purchasing from small local gardens in the neighborhood, giving some residents a little extra cash. People would pool our money together, bring all the food to the church, and everybody shop there because people was taking 2 and 3 buses to get to a place where they could get some fresh vegetables,
Yeah.
And eventually people said, well, why don't we have our own store? Why we got to drive all the way over there and bring stuff back? And the conversation started. We started petitioning. There is a need. There is a market here. People want fresh. We don't not want to eat well. We eat what's around us. But if you gave us another option. And so there was a lot of reinvestment happening all over the city, but it wasn't hitting our neighborhood. And so finally, there's a couple of relationships there. The people of God are all inside of this story. And that's the thing I want people to recognize. Christians will not get the credit for Whole Foods being in Inglewood. But there were people of God all throughout the story interweaving dots together. From David Doyle with Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, who's a member of CCDA and Lawndale Community Church, working to broker the deal. He came to me because he knew that I had deep relationships and roots in the community and said, hey, do you think the neighborhood would be down with this Whole Foods coming? Would they think it leads to gentrification? I said, hey, you got to talk to the neighborhood. So the first community meeting happens in the church, right? So 2 believers, both connected to Christian community development, are the ones who bring a community meeting together at the church to talk about whether or not this thing is coming. Then you got conversations around like money and like Walter Robb, who at the time was the CEO of Whole Foods, being brought in to talk to the residents. And so it goes from the church outwardly.
Yeah.
And then as we start talking about what we need if this thing is going to happen, we started making demands because the community had been empowered. They've been empowered to believe that, first of all, they deserved to have a place where they could buy fresh fruits and vegetables in their own neighborhood.
They deserved. Right? Come on.
They deserved it for being human.
They wasn't grateful, but they deserved it. Yes. Come on.
And so you're not going to tell us like, Either you're going to give us what we need or we don't want this store, right? We are empowered.
Yeah.
And so all the requests came from that empowerment. The request to see local vendors, our own folks, Miss Kimmy's Cakes, Uncle Earl's Gourmet Rolls, to see Jimmy's Vegan Cookies. We want our people's stuff sold in the store, the same stuff we was buying from them out their house, right? And then on top of that, we also want to see art on the wall that represents our neighborhood. So our local artist and muralist, Gerald Anderson, known as Just Flow, did little murals all over the building with like black kids eating apples. And like, we want to see ourselves. We asked for a community space in the Whole Foods. Why? Because we don't have a lot of community spaces to meet and gather and do things. So every time we build something, we need a community gathering space. So they put a community room in there where we have our 5 after 5 DJ nights. So we talk about bumping hip hop. We have parties in our Whole Foods on Friday nights.
Yeah.
Right? And then the biggest thing we said was we want most of the folks who work here to be from the neighborhood, and we need you to bring your price point down to where we can afford it. Like, what's the point of coming here and we can't afford nothing in it? And in order for Whole Foods to come, they had to do it. And they said yes. And it's been successful. And it's still there. And when we opened it up, as you said, on the first day, the mayor was there to cut the ribbon and the aldermen were there to get all their glory. We let them do their thing. But when that ribbon was cut, the DJ dropped the beat. We had the barbecue grills fired up. We hit the Cupid Shuffle and we celebrated it because it was the Inglewood Whole Foods. And there's no denying when you walk in it whose Whole Foods that is. And we're proud of it this day. We're proud of it. So plant gardens. Like, I'm not only a consumer in my neighborhood. When I go to Whole Foods, it's not just to consume. It's because I was a producer of what happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm planting gardens and eating what they produce. When I go to the Kusanya Cafe, which we opened up about 7 years ago, it's a garden I planted that I'm eating what it's producing. When I go to the food co-op at the church, we planted it and we're eating what produced. So that's what God is saying. He's saying you're really concerned about your neighborhood when you become a part of what's being produced there, rather than just only being a consumer there. That's kingdom values, y'all.
Yeah.
In a totally different way. That's good news.
Yeah.
It's good news in my neighborhood to be able to get kale and kumquats and eggplant. That's good news.
It's good news.
Holistic good news.
Yeah.
That's good news for now, not just someday, but today.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, what about this this project you're doing to create green space in your neighborhood, man, and how important that is? So Topeka is the capital of Kansas, but it's still not like it's not like Chicago. Man, Chicago is it's a lot of concrete in Chicago. and so man, tell us more about this project that you're in and why it's so important for this green space and how you're actually helping to protect the neighborhood through this project.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of background on it. So you talked about my wife working for the city now. My wife actually is the project manager for urban agriculture in the Department of Planning for the city of Chicago. So she oversees all of the urban agriculture growing spaces in Chicago. So she secures land, brokers deals, helps local farmers to be able to start farms, to grow their farms. And then she's trying to make sure that empty land that's not being used is used in proper ways and maybe used to continue to help neighborhoods that have been neglected over the decades to flourish greater. So a lot of the work that she did, even her position was kind of worked, which is funny, it comes full circle. The Resident Association of Greater Inglewood, which keeps coming up, acronym RAGE, started something called the Large Lot Program some years back, where they wanted the city to work with us for local residents to be able to purchase vacant lots that are on their block. so they wouldn't just become places where trash is thrown, grass is overgrown. But if somebody who lives on the block is able to purchase it, they'll take care of it, turn it into a garden, a playground, something. But we were trying to secure them for $1. The city loved it. It became a city program. And now the large lot program is something that's, there's been thousands of people all over the city who've been able to buy these vacant lots for $1. A lot of the work that my wife does is working with local residents in the neighborhoods who've purchased these lots to help them start gardens. And some of them become production gardens and farms where they're actually selling to grocery stores and things of that nature because they have the USDA, kind of certification wrapped around them through her work. But the biggest thing she's doing now is what you're talking about, where there's a old abandoned rail line in the neighborhood called that we're going to call the Inglewood Line. I think she's calling it the Inglewood Nature Trail and Line is what my wife is trying to name it. But a few years back, we did something similar on the northwest side of the city with the 606 Trail in Chicago, and it led to extreme hyper-gentrification in the Humboldt Park area, mostly Puerto Rican neighborhood that has flipped and been gentrified rapidly due to this new trail that used to be an abandoned railway that's like a bike path and a beautiful winding thing that people built condos and houses up next to it, and then it just moved out from there. Well, her job is her idea, I won't say her job, but her idea is to make sure that doesn't happen in Inglewood as we do the Inglewood Nature Trail. And so her dream is all along this railway line to have urban agriculture lining it. And the goal is to have residents owning land, organizations owning the land, growing on it so that nobody can come years from now when this line open up and put condos and houses and to begin to gentrify. We have to protect land, right? Like a lot of people don't recognize that a lot of the oppression and systemic injustice that we see in our country and in our world, it begins with the land, right? When you can strip people of land, when you can get them not to care about land, when you can get them removed from a land. When you think about what happened with Native Americans in this country, the only way we got America was removing people from land.
Yeah.
Because had the Native Americans stayed there, we would have never won them battles. They knew those woods. They knew those lands. They knew how stuff grew. They knew where to hide. But we had to move them. Right? It's the same thing when we do gentrification. So what we're trying to do is protect land, not own it, but protect it, right? In a way that says, hey, we want this to be a space that is for community. And for the residents that have endured the neglect all these years, we don't want them removed when there's finally some investment happening in the community. So yeah, she's a boss, like real talk, sits in rooms where she's the only woman all the time. And says what's gonna be and what ain't gonna be, but is very, very proud of the work she's done, and it's not always easy work because she works for the city, so it's like being a resident where the city has neglected the neighborhood, but yet also working for the city. Sometimes you can be caught in the middle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm super proud of her. She also growing a garden right in the back of our house, and so I love it. Like she is that Proverbs 31 woman, you want some basil? She's like, go out to the yard and cut some basil out so I can put in this dish,
Yeah. I
want some fried green tomatoes. Go out there and pluck up tomatoes out so I can fry green.
Yeah.
So plant gardens, eat what they produce is a real deal in our life.
Man, I so appreciate that, and I appreciate her just influence in the neighborhood. I mentioned to you, if I switch hats for a second, I mentioned to you before everybody jumped on that our non-religious nonprofit Scent, community development nonprofit Scent, has brokered a deal where we're about to get ready to start raising money to purchase 43 acres in our Hi-Crest neighborhood, man. For that same reason, we want to be able to develop and protect in our neighborhood some of the land that's available, and so I just think that's so rich, man. Is hearing your stories, one of like coming there and seeing what you were doing there gave me the vision to come back here and do the things that we're doing here, man. And so I'm just thankful for that. Now, you mentioned rage.
Yes.
You mentioned rage, and I love how one of the things I tell people, I said, people will say, well, you can't use that, you can't do that. And I said, man, it's always been the story of Scripture to redeem things. I said, there's no musical instruments of Hebrew origin. And yet, when you get into the Psalms, you see them prescribe certain instruments to be used in praising God. And so I feel like from the beginning, God has always taken things and redeemed them for his purpose. And I love how RAGE is being used as the acronym for your neighborhood association. And RAGE is not a Christian organization. It's just a neighborhood association. Would you tell us a little bit about what RAGE is, and then the value of Christians partnering with non-Christian organizations, groups, and individuals to practice presence?
Absolutely. So shout out to Aisha Butler, the president of RAGE and one of the co-founders. It was founded by a group of residents. And so it literally stands for Resident Association of Greater Inglewood. Inglewood, our community is split up into two parts, Inglewood and West Inglewood, but we like to keep it combined. So that's why we use the term Greater Inglewood. And so it was like lots of people were frustrated and upset about like the way things were going. And a lot of those folks are my age or younger, 40 and under, who were just like, man, we want to pick up the mantle of the civic leaders, social, justice workers and community leaders who were before us, man. How are we going to pick up the mantle? And so it all fell under the umbrella of this resident association because we didn't have one. And it's turned into, like, our resident association is bigger than just like, your grass got to be this height, or like, you can't paint this color on your house. Like, our resident association is about how do we change the narrative of the resident to help them see the community for what it truly is. And RAGE does so many, like the hand is in everything from narrative work to helping people to get jobs. We sponsored our own job fairs, literally called Jobs on the Block. We on a vacant lot. RAGE got one of them dollar lots and literally had a job fair outside, brought all the vendors to the lot. So people on the block couldn't say, I couldn't get to the job fair. The job fair is on the block.
Come on.
Things like that, right? Like doing true development, taking houses and flipping them, like started their own housing development, like with some people from the resident association. Sponsors one of my favorite things every summer, which is this series where we take over the park called So Fresh Saturdays, 7 parks in the neighborhood. And people say the park's too dangerous to go to. Well, the residents take over the parks with a stage and music and food and all that. And we call them So Fresh Saturdays. And every Saturday in the summer, a different park is taken over. And it's a safe, beautiful space for peacemaking and love and joy, but it's resident-led, right? Mm-hmm. RAGE is so great. And when I realized that they were actually doing the work that I feel like churches should be doing, rather than shaming the church and saying, church, we need to get on it, I just joined with RAGE.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, they already doing the work. They're already doing kingdom work. They just don't know it's God's work. They're doing good work and just don't know it's God's work. So why don't the people of God just join in and bring our resources to that? And that's where, earlier you talked about me saying that the church has to be involved, right? One of the things I often say when people ask me about Whole Foods, because people want to know, how did your church get a Whole Foods? I go, no, that Whole Foods did not open because of Canaan. Don't get it twisted. But I also let them know that Whole Foods would not have opened without Canaan.
Yeah.
And what I mean is the church doesn't have to lead. It needs to be said that while things may not change because of the church, things should not change without the church.
Come on.
We don't have to lead them. We need to be a part of it. God's DNA needs to always be there. Martin Luther King called us the conscience of society, right? Like, we need to always be there to say, hey, there's another way. This is what it means to love your neighbor. This is what it means to be careful not to do things for selfish gain, right? Like, that's my responsibility. But I don't have to lead it. I don't have to agree with everything people stand for. I don't have to. Aisha is a practicing Muslim. We don't have to agree about our faith for us to know. I ain't never heard a bullet to have a religion or a race or a gender or economics. A bullet just hits whoever it's hitting.
Yeah. And
so if we can create safe spaces where less of that is going on, we just need to partner together to bring the peace of God. And so, that is my heart. My heart is to see the church present in our neighborhoods and partnering with anyone who wants to see our neighborhoods flourish. Churches just need to be present and partnering. We need to get out of thinking that we got to lead everything and everybody got to follow us. Until we earn some equity back in our communities, until we get up out our doors and actually are concerned about our communities, we shouldn't expect anybody to want to follow us. We need to be the ones following, providing the gift and the spirit of God.
Whew. Whew. Man, you better be glad you don't live here in Topeka talking like that. Oh man, that's good stuff. What would you hearing stuff like what you're saying tonight, man? You said so much. There's some people who are ready to take a step, but they're saying like my first step is not moving back into a certain neighborhood, whether it's Hi-Crest or Central Park or North Topeka, or wherever you at, right? What would two questions here? What would a good, healthy first step look like? And then two, what cautions would you have for the, because we have two extremes. We have the one person that says, I for different reasons, we don't know everyone's story. I'm just not ready for that. And then we have the person that's too eager. And you know, in ministry, you have this person too that's too eager. And you about to go mess up a whole bunch of stuff. Like we really don't need you to move right now. We need you to slow down because so what cautions and then what encouragement?
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Couple of cautions. You named one, definitely about taking your time and making decisions about moving. I do want to kind of clarify that I am a huge proponent on people who lived in neighborhoods like this coming back, right? Like a lot of times this conversation is about, like, no disrespect, but like to white folks who've never experienced that and they're gonna come in and like be the hero and come in and make everything great. I'm really talking about people who grew up like me with the attitude of like, I gotta get out of there because there is a greater sacrifice for Johnathan Sublet to do it and for Jonathan Brooks to do it than for some people to do it, right? But the caution I have is don't do that just because you got amped up by a message, right?
Yeah.
There are lots of things to think through. And so I tell people all the time, like, the first thing you need to do is learn the place. Like a lot of people take for granted history of a place. Like I could run down the history of Chicago and the history of Inglewood for you in a second because I love the place. And I can't be talking about where I want it to go if I don't know where it's been and how it got to be what it is. So a lot of people skip over the step of actually doing the work of learning the place, right?
Yeah.
If you can't tell me how Topeka got its name,
yeah.
Like, why is it Topeka? What does that even mean? Right? Yeah. If you can't tell me how the different sections of the city actually became what they are, what were the stories and narratives that framed North Topeka and Hi-Crest and all that, if you can't, you're not ready to move into it, right? Secondly, this one might sound interesting to you. If you haven't spent some time repenting for your complicity in whatever has happened in your neighborhood and in your city, take your time to sit back and realize how much you have been a part of the problem and repent and be broken about the fact that you sat back and ignorantly let things happen around you without knowing.
Yeah.
Maybe not intentionally or anything, but ignorantly, meaning you had no clue.
Yeah.
Right? You just didn't know. And you have blood on your hands, just like I did. Right? Because I was ready to leave. I did not want to fix, stay, help, none of that. But that is an important step of repentance, confession, and lament of the way things are and how complicit we have been in that. Right? Mm-hmm. And then I would say, lastly, it is relationships. Before you come in, you need to have a relationship with the ministry, with individuals, with somebody who actually lives in the place so that you have relationships and can actually know what's going on in the neighborhood. I will say that that's difficult in this day and age, especially with some of the racial tensions going on, because some people are real fatigued with being your black person or being your inner city person, right? Like that you might need. But it is crucial So you just got to take the time to build relationships and be introduced to the neighborhood. I tell people who decide to move that if you move into a community or have the desire to move into a community, don't you have a desire to do a doggone thing when you come. Just be present. Notice, that is missions to me.
Yeah.
Just giving.
Yeah.
Just going to, when you look at some of the greatest miracles of Scripture, I talk about this a lot in my book. It happens with people just doing what they do every day.
Yep.
Disciples just going up to the temple to pray.
Yeah.
It's just what people do every day. And then something amazing happens as they connect with the Spirit of God. And so you don't have to manufacture things. You don't have to start ministries. You don't have to do any of that. You've got to be present and trust that the Spirit of God will open doors for you to be the tangible presence of God. And that the tangible presence of God, which was already there before you got there, will begin to convert you.
Yeah. That will begin to convert you, not them.
Mm-hmm.
That's so important, is knowing that God may call you in. And Hi-Crest is, man, one of those strange neighborhoods where we're a third. We're a third white, a third Hispanic, a third African American. And that's not the demographics of the city, but that's the demographics of our neighborhood. And knowing that God may call you in to be a part of Fellowship Hi-Crest, may call you in to volunteer with Sent, and you may build deep relationships. And I love you said this, man. I heard you say, I stole this from you. And you may labor for years, and the only thing that may change is you.
Yep.
And you got to be ready for that. And so, man, I appreciate so much the time you given tonight. And before I wrap this thing up, I know most of the world don't know this, but I know that you're MC, that you're in the hip hop culture. That's like you're not making fake TikTok videos and trying to get youth to come to a youth night, but you in there. So before I wrap this thing up, would you bless us with just a few bars?
Yeah.
As I get ready to wrap this up.
I'm real MC. I'm always ready for that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Just a little background on this, and then I'll just spit it. Like, one of my favorite movies is The Matrix. It's an older movie but like, it just really parallels like what I think happens in neighborhoods. A lot of times people have a fake view, a fake narrative about what's actually going on. And until you take that blue pill and really see what's going on, a lot of times you're confused. And in that movie, The Matrix, Neo is told by Morpheus, like, when you realize who you really are and what God, is going to do through you, that's the way I interpret it. Like, you won't have to dodge bullets. In the movie, he go like this and dodge them, but you'll be able to put your hand up and then just drop to the floor right in front of you. And so this joint is called Dodge Bullets. I just want to spit the verse, and hopefully it connects with you. Yo, bullets can fly. Pull it and try. But you'll be surprised the look in my eyes should prove I don't lie. With God on my side, I no longer die. I'm stronger because I'll ascend to the sky to live with my God, so why should I be afraid of where I reside? Bullets fly everywhere, just like they fly in the sky. So why have so many made the burbs they home? Don't get me wrong, that's cool if it's where you belong. But living out there don't make life sweet. Bodies found in the woods instead of lying in the streets. No disrespect. I don't mean to sound morbid, but I hate when folks believe they found gold when they move to a place where it's quiet at night. Quiet don't mean safe, plus what makes comfortable right. We used to live in catacombs in fear of the lions. Now we live in lavish homes in fear of the violence. I understand wanting to keep your family safe, but you ain't really stopping much with your community gates. I wish I could throw my hands up and bullets drop to the floor, but now I throw my hands up because I ain't scared no more. Since I see the world for who it is, I understand the gospel. Although I could dodge bullets, I no longer have to.
Come on, man. Thank you, bro. Man, if you were here and you were watching tonight and you want to engage more, remember, starting next week, on the 7th, I believe it is, on September 7th, starting then, we're going to be every Wednesday night dropping. Johnathan has filmed videos to go with every chapter of the book with discussion guides. And so we have an online book discussion group. So we're going to be dropping those videos in where you can discuss with other people throughout the week. You can process what you're reading in Church Forsaken. You can find it on Hoopla. You can find it on Amazon. You can get to it. And then if you want to go deeper, if you want a group of people that you can walk through this with, and maybe you don't have that, we're going to drop links in the discussion where you can reach out, you can sign up and say, hey, I want to be with a group that I can discuss this even offline, and we'll get you connected with a group. Thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to you being a part of that book discussion group online. We look forward to you getting into the community, and we just look forward on Hi-Crest taking this next step, the city of Topeka taking this next step, or wherever you may be watching this thing from, taking this next step. Not because you did something miraculous, but because you were there and you allowed God to use you where you were at. So thank you. Have a good night. Enjoy your time with family. And we'll see you tomorrow for Jumpstart, 7 a.m.